Monolith. Chapter 9. The Descent. They walked on in a shaken silence. Any relaxation that had been allowed to creep into their mind had been banished, never to be seen again. The inky darkness of the hallway now swirled with horrific possibilities as they closed the distance betwixt themselves and their goal. Thud, thud, thud. The mechanic walked in step with his heartbeat. His breath came in short and shallow, his lungs protesting the immense amount of physical labor he'd been tasked with. And yet they plodded on. 10 minutes after the death of the android, they came to the hatch. They stared in shocked awe. A chill raced up and down the mechanic's spine like little rats scurrying up and down a telephone pole. The hatch, which previously was opened via electronic mechanism, was ripped from its hinges entirely. A twisted hunk of scrap metal that at one point had covered the now gaping hole in the ground lay dejectedly off to the side of the hatch like trash. It had weighed at least 200 pounds of pure steel, now twisted up and thrown. The mechanic licked his lips nervously under his helmet as the group peered over the lip of the hole. There was nothing in the darkness as far as they could see, save for a ladder. I guess? The civilian choked, nerves interrupting his speech before his sentence was finished. "We have to go down," Goldthwait said resolutely. We gotta go down. He repeated as if trying to reassure himself. The mechanic was first to move, stepping down onto the ladder. Everyone looked at him, horrified. He looked up at them. "Is there any point in waiting? If it's down there, and we die. If it's not, then it's not. Simple as that." And with that, the mechanic began his descent. Everyone else in the group swapped nervous glances through their visors before the guard decided he would climb down. Goldthwait motioned the civilian in, and the man complied. Goldthwait gave one last look back down the hall from whence they'd come. He stood there for a couple moments, glaring into the darkness. The inky black swelled, beckoning him in. The hairs on his neck stood on end, bristling as the color drained from his cheeks. Something was watching them, something just beyond the penetration of his flashlight. He thought to call out to it, then thought better. Slinging his rifle over his shoulder, Goldthwait stepped onto the ladder. The dull ringing of the ladder was an unwelcome change of pace from the thudding of boots on the ground. It was more unsettling, bucking the routine and forcing their brains to cope with an entirely new noise. It was much more taxing on their bodies as well. Goldthwait was sure if they had been climbing with bare palms, his sweaty hands would have slipped right off the ladder. They dared not look down, and they dared not look up. There was something up there. Perhaps something down beneath, too, although they did not feel it. The eyes from above, though, grew more and more detectable. They all climbed like automatons, slowly descending, staring straight ahead into the wall as if the world's greatest work of art were hung on it. There was no break in the routine, no slip-ups, no mistakes. One hand, one foot, then the other hand and the other foot. Every step rung with a hollow metallic sound. Goldthwait knew the thing was watching him. He knew somehow, too, that it was smiling. He saw hunters from other dimensions come to skin humans alive, beings that fed on entirely spiritual food, beings that would trap you inside your own head where you would die over and over. He saw planets which were hostile wastelands comprised of tendrils and moving things. He saw these beasts worshipping something, a terrible something, which would soon come into physical being. He saw it all through his mind's eye, as if the hairs standing on end behind his head were whispering it to him. He realized at some point he had stopped climbing, and the noise of his companions was slowly fading. He jolted from his stupor, and immediately began trying to catch back up. Rung after rung, rapidly he descended. He dared not look up, but something was watching him. He could feel the eyes upon him as surely as one could feel a drill bit penetrating their skull. Still, Goldthwait dared not peek. Not even for a moment could he bring himself to do so. His stomach churned, threatening to expel bile. He felt his innards loosen as well. His body was convinced it needed to make itself lighter. He needed to run. He needed to escape. His breathwork came in faster and faster. The sounds of his companions were far off. Gritting his teeth and locking his jaw into place, Goldthwait decided he could no longer bear it. He snatched the holstered pistol strapped onto his thigh and pointed it upwards as he looked up. The feeling left his body immediately as he sunk back into the uneasy relaxation of constant subtler fears once more. There was nothing up there but the dark. He chuckled, shaking his head at himself. How stupid could you be? He was just too jumpy. Even for a day like today, he needed a level head. He began climbing down. Nothing but the dark seemed to stick out in his mind. The sentence to him inferred that there was indeed something up there, but it was not living. The feeling of watchful eyes straining to look at him returned with a vengeance, as if someone were staring through his bedroom window whilst he tried to sleep. Nothing but the dark inferred that there was indeed darkness above him. Darkness was not sentient, though. Darkness could not think. It could not breathe. It couldn't communicate. And it could not reproduce. Darkness was a concept. But then again, that was assuming that the darkness above him came from his dimension, and not some foreign dimension. And Goldthwait's mind began to slowly wrap around the fact that the darkness above him perhaps would not have been defined as darkness at all should you kill it and examine its hide in a lab. It was far darker. As Goldthwait took another step, he felt a jolt race through his leg and bounce off his knee. Looking down, he saw he had descended the ladder. Everyone else stood, staring at him as he shakily put both feet onto the ground. He looked around as if an attack might come from anywhere. "What took you so long?" asked the other guard. Goldthwait just shook his head. He called up the small holographic map on his helmet once more. The escape pods were still quite a trek, but it was within their grasp now. "Come on," Goldthwait commanded, and no one challenged him. The march started again, silent save for the stepping of their boots. It was no longer as simple as the corridors of the main hall had been. The ship was designed as a vacation destination, designed for the untrained to walk through and have ease of access to everything. As they walked now, their path was no longer straightforward. They climbed over pipes, squeezed through small gaps, occasionally constricted themselves through vents. It was a sprawling maze of hot pipes and electrical cables. The regular hum of machinery the mechanic was used to was now dormant, silent as death save for their movements. The silence made it all the more apparent when something was out of the ordinary. As they moved, the mechanic's ears pricked up. He didn't want to mention it to anyone else in the group for fear of fracturing their already fragile psyches. There was something else with them, though. Another noise. It was faint, far too distant to make out anything but the ripple of a wave lapping against an eardrum. It drew closer, and closer still, and none of them acknowledged it. They knew they didn't need to acknowledge it. It was already apparent. The mechanic's ears strained as the other men attempted to make their movements louder so that they didn't hear it. "Stop!" the mechanic commanded, and the group complied. He strained his ears, trying to listen over the mazework of pipes, cables, and support beams. It was a faint snuffling, but as he zeroed in on it, it was more than just that. It was a sobbing noise. He knew the tricks these things played, knew the danger they would be in just by moving towards it. He knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it was probably some entity or another looking to feed upon him. But even with this knowledge, he knew he could not simply move past it. Come on, let's move towards it. The mechanic stepped towards the noise. Are you fucking insane? The civilian asked. Absolutely not. That's a woman crying. You're just gonna leave her? I don't give a shit. A fucking quantum supercomputer calculating for the next 100 million years couldn't even begin to arrive at the number of shits I do not give. We're almost to the pods. The fear in his voice was palpable as he practically screamed at the mechanic. What's the good in surviving if we leave our morals behind? What if it's a real woman? Will you leave her to face these things on her own? Yes, in a heartbeat. You there. He pointed at the two guardsmen. Talk some sense into him. He's fucking batshit. The mechanic shrugged and began moving towards the source of the movement. As he slowly neared the edge of the other men's light beams, Goldthwait started after him. Following the actions of his higher-up, the other guard followed suit. Refusing to be left alone, at length the civilian scurried after them. The sound of the woman drew closer and closer still. Something was horribly off about it, although none of the men could quite put their fingers on what it was. The mechanic tuned his ears as the crying drew closer, listening intently, trying to discern the problem. She was almost right on top of them now. He'd look like a fool to stop now. As he turned the corner and laid eyes on her, he realized what his brain had been trying to tell him. The crying was on loop. It was as if someone had taken a recording of a woman crying and was playing it over and over. She sat huddled in a corner, frail, with tears running down her cheeks. She clutched an infant to her bosom, and she looked at the newcomers as if they were hungry wolves come to pounce on her. She sat slack-jawed and wide-eyed, glaring at them as if they were figments of her imagination. The mechanic approached first, lowering himself to one knee and extending his palms. Hey, we're not gonna hurt you, said the mechanic in a hushed whisper. Are you all right? The woman shook her head no. The mechanic hesitated, looking her up and down. There was nothing immediately wrong with her. What's wrong? They took him, she said, her voice straining to lower itself as far as the human vocal cords could. They took who? The mechanic prodded, trying his best to match her volume. My baby. Can I? The mechanic reached a hand out, but the woman shrieked and flinched away. No! 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 She roared, with every syllable her voice growing more and more animalistic. What's wrong with her? The civilian snapped, jumping into the middle of everything, as if he were in charge. We've got medical supplies. We can... Shut up! She shrieked. They'll hear you. She whispered now, hushed as if a killer were mere centimeters away. Who's they? The civilian prodded, stepping towards her. She looked one way, then the other. Slowly she pinched the swaddling around her infant child and pulled it back as if pulling back a curtain. The men went wide-eyed as the crimson horror swaddled in the clothes of infants was uncovered. Her eyes shifted one way then the other like a cornered rat in a cage as she tried to show them the horrific conglomeration of tentacles, eyes, and ichor. It became apparent that her right breast was simply gone. Blood leaked from a gory wound where once her motherly apparatus had sat. They've been feeding, she said, smiling softly as if talking about a long-lost lover. Ma'am, you're hurt. You need to get... Get away from that thing, Goldthwait offered, stepping forwards, trying against all hope to save her. The mechanic began to raise his gun, but the civilian was first. The assault rifle flashed at least 10 times. The moving pool of limbs and organs swaddled by the woman was obscured by the flash, as the woman herself was pitched backwards into a nearby pipe, shrieking the whole way. The civilian turned to the mechanic. "I told you we should have never fucking—" There was a horrific screech like the sound of twisting metal. As they turned and looked, the bizarre infant lay on the floor. Its beak-like mouth was agape, and the source of the noise seemed to be from the thing. The mother sat against the pipe. What remained of her skull was nothing but bloody fragments scattered onto the floor. The infant had somehow survived, wriggling and unable to control its own form as it was. The civilian bounded across the room, raising his boot to stomp on it. As the boot of the man who the mechanic knew not the name of, met with the creature's body, horror beyond comprehension was unveiled. The screaming abruptly ended as tendrils of colors never before seen by human eyes lashed out up the man's legs like a horrific infection. His body was twisted, contorted, molded into something else. The mechanic raised his shotgun and fired. 4 shells slammed into the new body the entity had taken on, but they did little. Where an arm was lost or a part of skull shattered, the thing just grew. Talons and tendrils, beaks and teeth, eyes and orifices, they all sprouted from within the man and burst forth from his skin. He fell over, the entity attached to him, unused to the newfound form. Goldthwait dumped his magazine into the thing, but it did little besides annoy it. The mechanic saw the futility of the struggle, and so with nothing else left, he turned and ran. Hey y'all, hope tonight finds everybody alright. We're coming to the end of another segment here. Yeah, you might notice the audio is a little bit different at the end. It's because I'm still kind of fucking around with it, trying to figure out what works on this new headset. I've been told it sounds really good when I'm playing online games, but I can't seem to get the same quality out of it for recording as I maybe could out of my other one, so we'll see. Anyways, as far as updates go, there's really nothing much to update on. These last few I haven't really done an end segment for because there hasn't been much to update on, and kind of halfway because I've made it to the end of the week and realized, oh shit, I didn't record far enough ahead. I better jump on that. So, yeah. Let me think. I've been working on some side projects in between drafts of my novel, most of which are going to wind up here. I guess after this drops, I've got another kind of sci-fi series planned that, well, not planned, I'm in the process of writing it. So far, I like it a lot better than Monolith. I think it's kind of nails the tone a little bit better. I think Monolith is maybe a little more action-oriented than, people will be used to for Lovecraftian sci-fi kind of horror. I've also got a kind of southern horror type series. I'd almost call it Western horror. Most of the stories are set in Texas because that's what I know. But I've got a few that won't be. It mostly takes place in the Wild West. I think about halfway through it, it's going to run 10 episodes. Halfway through it, I plan on shifting to kind of a gangland, like 1920s atmosphere. But it's all going to be horror, but different types of horror. It's not going to exclusively be Lovecraftian. There will definitely be Lovecraftian stories. I think I've got one that's kind of more of a slasher type beat that I'm real into.
and I'm pretty happy with it so far. I mean, obviously, I haven't gone back in to edit it or any of that, but I mean, as far as first drafts go, I think it's pretty good. What else was I about to say? Oh yeah, I've been working on another novel, just because I don't ever stop fucking writing projects that probably won't get finished. But I've been working on another kind of Western novel, Western horror. I'd call it more of a thriller. It's in the vein of Psychosis Blues, but I'd say there's a little less of those Tarantino-y elements to it. It's a little more coherent, less of the, what's the term? Unreliable narrator. The narrator's a lot more reliable, shall we say. And then as far as the more chill stuff goes, the Guided Quiet Times, which I'm going to be renaming as per YouTube algorithm to try and get some more views on them. I've got some more of them planned. I've got a little bit more written, but I mean, I just haven't been in the mood to write that recently, to be honest with you. I told myself before I work on this fantasy book, I've got to have 5 short stories written for the new Southern horror series I'm going to do, and I have to have at least 3 more of those little chill times recorded, not necessarily released, but at least recorded, mixed properly, all that, so you can look forward to more of that coming down the pike if you're here and you like those sorts of things. So yeah, that's pretty much all the updates from me. After the last episode of Monolith drops, I'll be taking a break for the holidays. I don't like saying that because the mood might strike me and I might drop something else, or I might just say, fuck it, I'm going to record, write, edit all this in one night and, drop it. But I know there's going to be 2 weeks at least where I'm going to be just completely away from my laptop and just unable to access it, period. So 2 weeks I'll definitely be out. And if you want to see what I'm doing in those 2 weeks, you can follow me on social media. Twitter, I think it's Southwestern Scourge. Instagram is going to be at Texan Scourge. Yeah, I mean, that's where I post most of my stuff at. So I hope you all have a blessed night, and I'll see you all back here next week when the finale of the Monolith drops.